What is going on, everybody? Thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream segment of Me Kaz. And of course, I am your humble host, Niko House. Today with me, I have one of the co-founders of Action4Assange and a member of the MCSC Network, Taylor Hudak, not to be confused with the 100,000 other Taylor Hudaks that apparently exist. What is going on, Taylor? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well, staying busy. I can't complain, but in light of all this sad news and all this upsetting news, I've heard that we actually have had some good news coming in the form of Chelsea Manning's release. So of course, that came through the dismissal of the grand jury for Wikileaks. So I had to, bring you on so you can educate the masses on what this means, of course, for Chelsea Manning, what this means for Wikileaks, and what it could potentially mean for Julian Assange. So first, can you give us your, your commentary on Chelsea Manning being released from prison yesterday?
Yeah, absolutely. We found out last night. I have to say I was pretty shocked and very, very excited about this. Again, this is a huge victory for Chelsea Manning and for her legal team. And this also is a huge victory, or somewhat of a victory for Julian Assange, because with this grand jury dismissal, what that indicates is that as of right now, there are no additional charges that are going to be placed on Julian Assange or on any WikiLeaks staff members. That is not to say that there could be additional charges in the future, but with regard to this specific grand jury investigation, there are no additional charges. And again, Chelsea Manning was being imprisoned for the past a year because she refused to testify before this grand jury that was investigating WikiLeaks. And
in secret, by the way.
Yes, so the grand jury process is a very secretive process, and many people are opposed to grand juries. Many legal experts oppose them because they happen behind closed doors. It's not open to the public, and so Chelsea Manning is against this process. And as a way to kind of stand by her principles, once again, she chose not to testify before this grand jury. And she was just released. The judge made the ruling yesterday, and this was a federal judge, Anthony Trenga. And I think the timing in all of this is quite interesting, considering Julian Assange just had the first part of his extradition hearing.
That didn't go well for the prosecutor, I heard.
No, it didn't. And that also brings me, it very much relates to Chelsea Manning's situation as well. So Chelsea Manning, of course, was brought up during this full extradition hearing that took place at the end of February. Now, I was reporting there from London, and I was not in the courtroom, but I was outside the courtroom. And what we were learning from what was taking place in the courthouse was that the U.S., the Crown Prosecution Service, was actually mischaracterizing evidence as it related to Chelsea Manning and her associations with Julian Assange. What they were trying to establish, what the U.S. was trying to establish, was that these two individuals were co-conspirators, and that Assange was helping Manning get into this government computer and into this account so she could access classified material and then leak it to WikiLeaks. However, she was just trying to get into this account on this computer for entertainment purposes, specifically video games, I think music, and it had
things that you generally do when you're deployed downrange. Like, because you're bored out of your mind and you're looking for things to do. It's very difficult to find entertainment when you're deployed.
Right. So that's what she was doing, and that came out in court. The defense brought this point up, and this was also cited as being an abusive process on behalf of the Crown, which is the U.S. government. So it seems very interesting that now they're starting to see that the case against Assange is pretty weak. The one person that they were banking on testifying against him is now released because they know there is no case there. And so I think it's very interesting and very much a victory for Assange and his legal team as well.
That's awesome. So now Chelsea Manning was being held in contempt of court because she wouldn't testify in front of this grand jury. This grand jury has been in place for 10 years, which is insane. And it makes sense too, right? Of course it would be put in place around the time they exposed George W. Bush because, well, it wasn't just about George W. Bush, but who could they take down next? And of course, we know subsequently they did take down a lot of people next. Now, this grand jury being dismissed probably also means something in one form or another for Julian Assange too. Could you break that down and what that means for the grand scheme?
Yes. So a grand jury that was investigating WikiLeaks. Again, we don't know the specifics of really what they were trying to investigate specifically, because this is a very secretive process. But what this means is that there are no additional charges, no additional indictments that will be placed on Assange because of this grand jury. That is not to say that there could be another grand jury that is convened and then for some reason is able to...
But that would have to be, just out of curiosity, that would have to be for a whole... They would have to recharge him, re-indict him, re-investigate. But in the meantime, he would have to probably be re-released because they don't have anything, right? That's to my understanding.
Yeah, no, they really don't have anything. As far as the grand jury, I think that they are convened and then they determine if there is enough evidence to charge somebody with a crime. And right now, again, from this specific grand jury, there are no additional charges. And it's very interesting, too, that Jeremy Hammond, who was involved in the Stratfor leak, he actually was taken out of he was serving time already. He was taken out of his prison several months ago and placed in like solitary confinement, I believe. And
like Chelsea,
he too is also being sent back to the prison that he was at before. So they kind of, took these whistleblowers and put them in solitary confinement, hoping that they would testify. And now that they realize they have no case, they're now being let go. Well, Manning's being freed, and then Jeremy Hammond is going back to the prison that he was originally at.
So it seems like they were just trying to put the screws to him, basically. Force them to testify by torturing them, quite literally. And when they couldn't get what they wanted, which once again, it's curious to me that, once again, Julian Assange goes through this extradition hearing. They don't get, the prosecution does not get the results they've wanted so far. I think that it's probably on the verge of being dismissed. I do believe that they kind of have that feeling. But either way, the grand jury is suddenly dismissed. Mind you, any indictment that, where they tried to bring charges on Julian Assange, it just came within the last year and maybe year and a half. So that grand jury has been around for 10 years. The only thing that they've ever argued was what was in that indictment on behalf of the prosecution against Julian Assange. Didn't work out well. The moment that it doesn't work out well, Manning is released, Jeremy's back to his old prison, and the grand jury is dismantled. It does make me wonder if in the coming months, weeks even, could potentially Julian Assange be released? When is the next step of the extradition hearing?
Yeah, so again, like I said earlier, the first part of the extradition hearing already took place, which is more of like a precursor of what's to come. And this second part of this full extradition hearing is an evidentiary hearing, which will begin on May 18th and will last, they're expecting it to last for about 3 weeks. It could be a little bit shorter, a little bit longer. And Christian Hrafnsson, the editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks, I spoke with him in London, and he was telling us that he believes whatever side the judge chooses to rule in favor of, that side will appeal, and this will be a very lengthy process. It could take years before this is finalized.
But so I don't, because Great Britain is way different than the United States. If Assange wins and the prosecution appeals, which they always do, Assange still gets the release, because what happens in an appeal usually is that the judge's order is upheld until otherwise overturned, correct?
I'm a little bit hesitant to speak on that issue specifically. I am not very familiar with how that process works.
I didn't know if his lawyers had said anything to that effect, but it's going to be interesting to see. Because I don't even know why he's being held in prison at this point. I mean,
well, he's being held on remand right now. He really should not be in prison. He already served his sentence for violating bail. So basically, he's just being held there because he's considered a flight risk. So he's being held on what they call remand in the UK, and essentially he is a political prisoner in Belmarsh prison, which is the worst prison you could be in the UK. It's often referred to as the UK's Guantanamo Bay. That's how bad it is there. I was there. It is not the area. It is not the happiest of places. It is not a good place to be in at all. And he's being really treated quite poorly, quite poorly. I do want to mention the fact that he has been sitting in a glass box during this court hearing. He was sitting by himself in a glass box, not even allowed to sit next to his attorneys, which in the United States, that's standard practice. The defendant always has the right to sit with their attorneys, or his or her attorneys. That is not happening in this case, but in the UK, that's more of a common practice. But typically they'll isolate defendants who are violent or pose a threat to the public, and Assange is not violent, no history of violence, not a threat to the public. So they're really mistreating him. And when the defense issued a request to the judge to allow Assange to sit next to his attorneys, the judge denied this request. So moving forward, he will continue to be in this glass box. He was also handcuffed numerous times throughout this hearing. He was strip searched 2 times, and also his court documents are being confiscated at the end of the day. And his attorney, or one of his attorneys, Edward Fitzgerald, said that this is a huge violation because that really impairs his right to a fair trial. So
yeah, that's what I was going to ask. How can he properly prepare a defense, like with his attorneys, if he has no idea what the hell is being said or talked to? Like, after all this is said and done, and if they find him innocent, the judge releases him, there is about to be hell to pay. And it's quite possible that Julian Assange might be, his generations of his family might be rich after this, because I would sue and I would tie them up for the rest of my life after what they did to Julian Assange. Because not only, and same for Chelsea Manning. I hope she goes back and sues the courts, because they basically held her in contempt of court for a testimony that they never needed. Basically, they were, what I'm saying? Like, it clearly, whatever defense you went in with was the defense that you were going to use. And it seemed like you were just trying to get her to, they were trying to use hearsay, basically, is the legal term, but make her a credible, like a credible witness, but then discredit her like incredibly, and then use that to say, oh, well, look, Chelsea Manning and Jeremy, because you have to have corroborating evidence, so you have to have somebody else say the same thing, and give almost the exact same story. And that seems like what they were trying to do.
Well, yeah, you're exactly right. In fact, Chelsea Manning, they did not even need her testimony because they already have her testimony from her court case back in 2013. However, based off of what she said in court and what was presented by the defense during her case was not beneficial for the U.S. government, because Chelsea Manning said that she was inspired to leak this information because of her own moral compass. It was the reason why she chose to do this. She leaked that information by her own volition. And what the prosecution, the United States, is trying to argue is that Assange was the one who solicited Manning and really encouraged her to leak this information. But Manning's statements from 2013 contradict that, so they were really putting the pressure on her to kind of fold and provide them with that vital testimony that they needed. They're not going to get it, and that's why she's free.
And and to my understanding, WikiLeaks has never coerced anybody into giving them information. They are usually contacted, and that's usually how the relationship starts. Now, I would imagine if there was some chance that Julian Assange did solicit the information, it would be in messages, and it would be. Go ahead.
So here's where it gets interesting. What they are arguing, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but this is a really interesting point. The U.S., the prosecution, is arguing that back in 2009, the WikiLeaks website had a list of the most wanted leaks list. And this was basically a compiled list of documents that activists, journalists, attorneys, whistleblowers, academics wanted to see be made public. And so they said, hey, here's a list of documents that people are interested in having. So if you can just putting it out there, okay? It was just on the website. What the U.S. was insinuating was that Chelsea Manning somehow saw this list of the most wanted leaks from 2009 and was therefore inspired by that to then leak the information. Therefore, Assange was soliciting Manning. I know the argument's very weak, but that's what they were trying to argue.
Did Manning ever say that? Because I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't even know that was a thing. So I don't know how Manning would have known that while being deployed.
Right. It makes no sense. And there's no evidence to suggest at all that she was inspired by this 2009 list of the most wanted leaks. And was that most wanted? Correct me if I'm wrong, but was that most wanted most wanted leaks list? Was that put out by WikiLeaks specifically? Yes, it was put out by them on their website, but it was just a just somebody putting something on their website saying, yeah, we want these leaks. Of course, I could say the same thing on my YouTube channel. You know what I'm saying? So what does that mean? And also at that point, although Julian Assange would be the editor-in-chief. So just because it was put out on the website also doesn't mean that it was Julian Assange who put it out on the website. So there's like a whole host of other things like that you have to take into account if you're going to use that argument. Because you might not even have the right guy. Like, okay, so maybe let's say, for example, if Chelsea Manning was inspired by that, that post. In 2009, what was Julian Assange at the embassy in 2009? I can't remember. No, he was not in the embassy.
He wasn't in the embassy yet? Okay, but so basically, Julian Assange, you have to assume that Julian Assange ordered this person to do this. Then you would, of course, have to both prosecute that person and Julian Assange. That's what would have to take place, whoever put that up there, in a conspiracy to solicit this information. Like there would have had to be so many steps that would have had to take in place first that could be admissible in court and then, proven before you can even get to the point of being able to use that argument in a legitimate way. And it would still be a weak argument at that point. But that's crazy. So
as I was saying it, I could see your face and you're like, what are they?
Yeah, that's the dumbest shit I've ever heard.
It's insane. Every time I tell people about this, because this is something that's not very well known and it wasn't highlighted too much in the media, but when I explain the U.S.'s argument with the most wanted leaks list, everybody has the same reaction. It's confusion and shock.
So I want to wrap up, but before we go, can you let people know what they can do to help in their own way with either Chelsea Manning or Julian Assange or both?
Yeah, absolutely. I would encourage everybody who can to help both of these heroes. Chelsea Manning is released from prison. However, she does have up to $256,000 in fines that she is still required to pay. And obviously, she is unable to do so. So she needs everybody's help. If you can donate, there is a GoFundMe. And I think that they have raised, last time I checked, it was like 45 grand they have raised so far. So any donation is really, really helpful so she could pay this off. And of course, not everybody is able to donate. That's completely understandable, but just sharing the link on social media or telling your friends and family is really helpful. Now, as far as
Caitlin Johnstone, on that point, Caitlin Johnstone has the link. If you go to Caitlin Johnstone's Twitter account, if you follow her, I know a lot of people here do, she has the link and she talked about it. And she wrote an article talking about Chelsea Manning. I think the link is there as well. So go ahead.
Yeah, you're right, it is. And in addition to that, Julian Assange, of course, needs our help as well. And Christine Assange, Julian Assange's mother, created a GoFundMe, and that has been circulated on her Twitter page. And this is basically just to help with his legal funds and to help his situation as well. And then also I would encourage everybody who can to donate to WikiLeaks. It's a nonprofit organization. And again, like I said with Manning, if you can't donate, that's completely understandable. Just sharing the link and bringing awareness to this issue on social media is really, really helpful.
Awesome. Thank you so much for bringing us that update, Taylor. For everybody else, you heard her. Go help out WikiLeaks either by donating or sharing the link. That goes for WikiLeaks, Chelsea Manning, or Julian Assange's legal fees. Everybody can't help in the same way, but doing what we can is extremely important. And at the very least, it shows solidarity. And I think that the organization and both of those people need to know, because especially for Julian Assange, that's kind of like the only thing that's keeping him hopeful and alive right now. They need to know that there are people out here that are supporting them and fighting for them. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream segment of MCSC Network. And always remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.